Scientists a matter of when, not if, there will be a major earthquake in the new Madrid Seismic Zone, centered about 160 miles south of St. Louis.
We're having an earthquake.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This is live on air.
Something terrifying has come to light in New Madrid, spreading fear worldwide. Deep in the heart of America lies the New Madrid Seismic Zone, a sleeping giant located about 160 miles south of St. Louis. Across numerous cities far from New Madrid, people felt the earth shake beneath them, sparking widespread fear and filling newspapers from Charleston to New York with alarming stories. What if this is just the beginning of a ripple effect that could devastate Europe? Let us explore the dangerous seismic zone that could start the devastation of the world. The seismic risk in America's core. In the heart of America, a significant seismic threat lies beneath the seemingly calm surface. About 160 miles south of St. Louis, the New Madrid Seismic Zone stretches silently, a dormant behemoth cloaked from the everyday observer's view. Historical accounts from the early 19th century recount devastation, the land rebelling violently. Yet, as people continue their daily routines, a debate rages between scientists and skeptics about the real dangers looming underneath. The winter of 1811 and 1812 was a period marked by a series of powerful earthquakes, the strongest recorded in the contiguous United States, reaching magnitudes of 7 or higher. These seismic events weren't centered in the earthquake-prone West Coast, but occurred right in the middle of the country, near New Madrid, Missouri. The peculiarity of such powerful earthquakes occurring far from tectonic plate boundaries continues to puzzle and provoke scientific inquiry. On December 16, 1811, tremors from this seismic activity were felt as far as Asheville, North Carolina. Although no major damage or fatalities occurred there, the fear and confusion were palpable, especially among residents who had never before experienced an earthquake. Newspapers from across the country, from Charleston to New York, chronicled these events, capturing a snapshot of a nation rattled by unexpected geological upheaval. However, the story of the New Madrid earthquakes isn't just about the events themselves, but about the implications they carry for understanding seismic risks today. Despite over 2 centuries of scientific advancements, the precise causes of these quakes remain elusive. This isn't merely a historical footnote, but a pressing concern, given that the entire region still registers frequent, albeit smaller, seismic activities. These tremors, often unnoticed by the public, are stark reminders of the Earth's latent energies and the unpredictability of their release. Scientists have dedicated considerable effort to studying the New Madrid Seismic Zone, driven by a need to understand whether the catastrophic events of 1811 and 1812 were anomalies or harbingers of future disasters. Data accumulated since the 1980s and 1990s indicates persistent seismic activity in the area, hinting that these historical quakes were not isolated incidents. Other regions within the stable interior of the North American plate, such as the Virginia Seismic Zone and Charleston, have also experienced significant quakes, challenging the conventional wisdom that major earthquakes in the U.S. are likely to strike only along the active West Coast plate boundaries. For example, the 2011 Virginia earthquake, with a magnitude of 5.8, and the 1886 Charleston quake, measuring 7.3, both caused considerable damage and underscored the potential for significant seismic events deep within the plate's interior. This raises uncomfortable questions about preparedness and the underlying assumptions of geological stability in regions traditionally considered safe from such natural calamities. Interestingly, the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, gives a sobering assessment of the risks. There's a 25 to 40% chance of a magnitude 6 or higher earthquake striking the New Madrid area in the next 50 years, with a 7 to 10% chance for a quake of magnitude 7.5 or greater. These probabilities are alarmingly high, considering the potential impact on the densely populated and economically vital regions of the eastern United States. So the specter of another major quake is not a matter of if, but when. While this may serve as a wake-up call for some, Others view the continual warnings and studies with a mix of skepticism and resignation. After all, the Earth will move when it wills, and all the scientific predictions and debates may do little to sway its inexorable tectonic shifts. Meanwhile, the public, perhaps understandably, tends to focus on more immediate concerns, relegating the threat of a massive earthquake to the back of their collective minds. However, the history and ongoing research suggests that ignoring the seismic potential beneath the heartland of America might be a gamble that could someday prove catastrophic. Our understanding of the geological processes in New Madrid is far from complete, and we often have to rely on rough estimates based on old data. We know some things about the area's unique geology, but we still don't have a clear model to explain how stress builds up and releases in the earth there. This kind of model isn't just for scientists to geek out over. It's crucial for predicting when earthquakes might happen and understanding the kind of damage they could cause. Whenever an earthquake shakes this region, it makes us look back to New Madrid's history, starting from its quieter early days before it became known for major earthquakes. New Madrid was a new part of the United States just a few years before it became famous for its tremors. The area had been passed around like a hot potato, from the French to the Spanish, back to the French, and finally to the Americans. Founded in 1789 under Spanish control, New Madrid was mostly settled by Americans who had promised to stay loyal to Spain. This promise was Spain's way of trying to stop the United States from spreading into their territory. They named the town New Madrid in honor of the Spanish minister who helped the settlers move there, hoping to create a community of Americans who would keep the U.S. at bay. Spain was also keen on controlling the trade routes along the Mississippi River. Despite problems like regular floods and food shortages, Spain's offer of large chunks of land got more Americans to move westward. By the start of the 19th century, New Madrid had grown significantly. It turned into the busiest port between St. Louis and the Gulf Coast, serving as a crucial stop for hundreds of boats on the Mississippi. Let's step into a time of big changes and natural disasters that reshaped the land. The catastrophic 1811 quakes. This Spanish period ended quietly in 1800 when Spain gave Louisiana back to France. Then Napoleon, busy with wars in Europe and losing interest in his American lands, sold the huge territory to the United States in 1803 for $15 million in a deal known as the Louisiana Purchase. This agreement officially made New Madrid American in 1804, which pleased most residents. However, their happiness didn't last long. Just 8 years later, New Madrid was almost destroyed by a series of intense earthquakes that also wiped out other growing towns along the Mississippi. The story of these disasters helps us understand what happened during those earthquakes by looking at personal stories. One story comes from William Pierce, who was traveling the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to New Orleans with a group of flatboats. They were near New Madrid when the first quake hit. Pierce's account of that night vividly shows the chaos and fear that spread through the area. His detailed descriptions provide a deep, impersonal view into the scary experiences of those caught in the natural disaster, reminding us of the human side of these geological events. As we explore these personal accounts and connect them to larger patterns, it's clear that while the physical shaking has stopped, the story of New Madrid and its earthquakes is still unfolding, with new information and theories adding to our understanding all the time. At 2 a.m., a sudden shaking woke Pierce and his crew. The violent tremors made them think they had hit a sandbar. They rushed to the deck, disoriented and alarmed, only to realize that an earthquake, not a river hazard, had caused the commotion. As the aftershocks continued, the quake's power became evident. Nearby, a large oak tree split in half, its top crashing towards the river, signaling the extent of the disturbance. The forest around them seemed to dance wildly, its trees swaying heavily and their branches clashing loudly, much like the sound of a strong wind tearing through dense vegetation. The crew debated whether to move to a safer location or remain where they were. The danger of navigating the river at night, filled with unseen threats, eventually convinced them to stay put, a decision that seemed wise as the morning brought another, even more powerful quake. The ground where they had been just hours before split open and collapsed into the river. Trees were uprooted and thrown into the rushing waters, suggesting that moving would have likely led to disaster. With the light of day, The full scale of the terror surrounding them became visible. They could see the river turn into a murky, violent torrent, and the air was filled with the noise of the earth continuously shaking. Loud booms came from across the river, initially thought to be the banks collapsing. However, the true cause was revealed with the fifth tremor: volcanic eruptions. Lava and ash were thrown high into the air, and the river bubbled and seethed as if boiling. Geysers erupted near their boat, shooting water, mud, and debris high into the air, creating a chaotic scene. Ancient trees, long submerged, were propelled upwards, adding to the surreal, threatening landscape. This ongoing catastrophe underscored the unrelenting force of nature. The earth rumbled deeply, hinting at more upheaval to come. Poisonous gases followed each seismic wave, leaving deep, gaping holes in the earth, a visible sign of the turmoil beneath. Throughout the day, the ground never ceased its tremors, and the sound of explosions echoed continuously, like thunder rolling across the landscape. The river's bed shifted endlessly, its water perpetually in turmoil, posing constant danger to their boat. Areas where the water boiled intensely were particularly threatening. Thankfully, none of these underwater eruptions occurred directly beneath their boat, which could have resulted in total destruction. The sound of trees crashing into the river was relentless. Entire riverbanks gave way, dragged into the swirling waters, taking everything with them. Watching this unfold, Pierce and his crew were reminded of nature's raw power and unpredictability. Their ordeal was not just a series of unfortunate events, it was a vivid lesson in the impermanence of life and the frailty of human endeavors against the might of nature. Every moment was a harsh reminder that their survival hung by a thread, dependent on the whims of an indifferent earth. This day was a brutal testament to the reality that humans are merely transient guests in the grand scheme of nature's domain. In December, the northern Mississippi Valley experienced a series of violent natural disasters that began a long period of seismic activity. Strong winds tore trees from the ground and threw them into the river, creating dangerous conditions for anyone on the water. One particularly large tree, measuring 3 feet in diameter, was flung over 100 yards from the riverbank, turning into a deadly obstacle for boats. As the riverbanks were continuously battered, entire small islands were wiped off the map, seemingly erased from existence. Those who traveled down this devastated river saw only destruction and chaos, with the once peaceful river transformed into a dangerous torrent filled with floating debris. Now we'll see how these huge earthquakes kept changing lives in the land around them. The earthquakes that redefined the Mississippi, this was only the beginning of the ordeal. The region was rocked by a series of large earthquakes, one after the other, triggered by a complex system of underground faults. 2 more massive quakes followed, each as powerful or more so than the first. The second significant earthquake hit on January 23rd, and the third and strongest struck on February 7th. These earthquakes were notable not only for their power, but also because of the way they moved the ground upwards, a rare event caused by a thrust fold in the earth. The impact of these earthquakes on the Mississippi River was catastrophic. The ground split, with one side dropping and the other rising about 20 feet, creating huge rapids at 2 different points along the river. This sudden change forced the river to flow backwards for nearly an hour, an incredible sight that confused and frightened those caught in its reverse flow. A boatman who was sleeping on his boat moored 13 miles above New Madrid was jolted awake by a loud noise. The river around him was in turmoil. Trees were falling into the water, and his boat began to shake violently. He quickly cut the ropes tying his boat to the shore and found himself being pushed upstream at an alarming speed, fighting against the wind that threatened to take his hat off. As the river calmed and returned to its normal flow direction, the boatman faced a new challenge: a large waterfall that had formed across the river, dropping about 6 feet and creating a half-mile wide barrier of rushing water. Controlling his boat became nearly impossible in the turbulent water, but through continuous effort and some luck, he managed to survive the ordeal. When he finally reached New Madrid, the scene was one of complete ruin. The town had sunk about 12 feet into the ground, and it was deserted. The residents, along with people from nearby areas, had moved to temporary camps outside the town. Their cries of despair filled the air, a vivid reminder of the devastating impact of the earthquakes. Around him, nearly 30 other boats showed signs of similar desperate struggles for survival, each bearing its own story of either making it through or succumbing to the river's wrath. This situation posed the question of how much more the valley could withstand, given the severity and frequency of these natural disasters. The New Madrid earthquakes, which happened over 2 centuries ago, don't seem to be well remembered, even though they caused extensive damage across the largely unpopulated Mississippi Valley. It's as if our collective memory chooses to keep some events and forget others, relegating significant historical occurrences to mere side notes. This selective memory prompts one to ponder whether incidents that don't impact us directly are deemed less important. On the chilly morning of February 7th, the earth didn't just shake. It unleashed unprecedented fury, disrupting the quiet before dawn. Eliza Bryan, a dedicated schoolteacher who chose to remain behind, captured the horror of those moments in her accounts. She saw how the Mississippi River dramatically withdrew, only to surge forward again, rising 15 to 20 feet higher than usual, carrying away boats and lives in its powerful flow. The water transformed the landscape, dragging boats that had been stranded on the dry riverbed into a nearby creek, turning what was a temporary safe haven into a deadly trap. The river's return was ruthless, yanking young cottonwood trees from their roots along the banks with terrifying precision. As the waters ebbed, they left a scene of devastation. Fish lay dead on the newly formed banks, unable to keep up with the rapid changes in water levels, and the remains of boats littered the landscape. Among the wreckage was a particularly heart-wrenching sight. A boat that had been carrying a woman and her 6 children was completely destroyed, leaving no survivors. This seismic catastrophe also ripped open the earth, creating fissures that spewed sand. These fissures appeared and disappeared swiftly, leaving no evidence of their brief existence. Meanwhile, aftershocks continued to shake the area. Initially, they were frequent, mirroring the rapid beat of a frightened heart, and then became less common. Yet they persisted for more than 10 years. It took a week for the river's rapids to calm down enough to allow safe navigation, briefly pausing the ongoing upheaval. Eastward, where the land sank, the transformed riverbanks turned into vast swampy areas that would later become the site of a significant Civil War battle and form a large lake. This lake stands today as a silent reminder of the area's turbulent seismic history. Although the destruction was vast, it mainly affected the Mississippi Valley, a region so lightly populated that the true extent of the quake's fury might have been underappreciated. In distant Charleston, South Carolina, the quakes were strong enough to damage buildings, indicating their far-reaching impact. These events led Congress to pass its first disaster relief bill, an attempt that unfortunately turned out to be a disaster itself. Marred by poor management and fraudulent activities, it did little to help those who were most affected, highlighting the government's inability to respond to natural disasters effectively. Despite their severity and broad impact, the memory of the New Madrid earthquakes quickly faded. Within 50 years, they were almost entirely forgotten, with their history only slowly reconstructed in the latter half of the 20th century. This fading of memory serves as a stark reminder of how quickly we can forget the powerful forces of nature, only to be surprised when they strike with similar ferocity in our times. Next, we'll dig into why these big quakes happened and think about if they could strike again. How ancient earthquakes affect our modern world. As we now look deeper into the reasons behind such powerful earthquakes, we must consider the unsettling possibility that they could happen again. What kind of destruction could they cause if they were to occur today? To estimate their potential impact, it is essential to understand the unstable geological conditions of the Mississippi Valley area. This understanding is not just for academic interest, but is crucial for preparing for future events and building a resilient memory that does not conveniently overlook the lessons the Earth teaches us. Let's delve into the Mississippi floodplain, an extensive area stretching deep into the earth, where cities like Memphis sit atop layers of sand and mud. This wasn't a sudden occurrence, but the result of years of work by the Mississippi River, which diligently transports sand, rocks, and mud from its mountainous source to lower, flatter areas. Over thousands of years, the river has meandered, leaving deposits that have built up the floodplain. One of the most significant results of this process is the Mississippi River Delta, now home to over 1 million people, including New Orleans. If we traveled back 4,000 years, we'd see this huge area just starting to form from the sediments the river deposited. Turning our attention to the ocean's role, let's travel back about 80 million years. Back then, the southern part of what is now the United States was submerged under the sea. Near present-day Memphis and New Madrid, the land has undergone dramatic transformations, from part of a mountain range to a vast underwater basin. Over time, sediments from the Gulf of Mexico and the ancient Mississippi filled this basin with layers of sand and clay. Today, under cities like Memphis, instead of solid rock, there's a deep layer of loose, wet sand and mud. This geological setup has its advantages and disadvantages. For example, the sand layers mixed with clay act as natural underground water tanks that are crucial for Memphis. They provide clean drinking water to about 1/3 of its residents. However, this abundance of water once sparked a significant legal conflict. The state of Mississippi sued Memphis, claiming it was taking water that naturally extended across state lines. Mississippi wanted nearly $1 billion in compensation. This legal battle went all the way to the Supreme Court, which ended up dismissing the case, allowing Memphis to continue using the water. Now let's discuss why this area's geology is problematic during earthquakes. The ground here, made up of tiny particles that aren't tightly connected, shakes more intensely during earthquakes than solid rock. When the soil is wet, which it often is due to the area's natural aquifers, it's even more susceptible to shaking. Imagine shaking a box filled with loosely arranged items. Everything settles more densely. During an earthquake, the little spaces between soil particles, usually filled with air, fill with water instead. This trapped water increases pressure within the soil, reducing the friction among soil grains, allowing them to move apart easily. In stronger earthquakes, ones that reach a magnitude of 5.5 or higher, this can lead to soil liquefaction, where the ground acts more like a thick liquid than solid earth. The results can be disastrous. Infrastructure might sink, buildings could tilt or collapse, and roads could become unusable, transforming the region into a dangerous swamp when the earth shakes. This balance between natural gifts and risks highlights the complex relationship between the Earth's geological processes and human activity. As we live in and modify these sensitive areas, it's crucial to remember the power and demands of the natural world. Respecting and understanding these forces can help us better prepare for and mitigate their impacts, ensuring safer and more sustainable living conditions in these geologically active regions. Soil liquefaction is a powerful and often destructive process that occurs during earthquakes, turning solid ground into a treacherous, quicksand-like substance. This can cause serious problems for buildings and other structures. Even if a building survives the earthquake itself, it might still be damaged or destroyed if the ground beneath it collapses. The phenomenon doesn't just affect buildings. It can also disrupt underground utilities like pipes and cables, causing them to float up, break, or shatter. Roads, bridges, and dams can lose their foundational support, leading to landslides and significant land sinking. The New Madrid seismic events are famous for the intense and widespread liquefaction they caused. Historical accounts from these events often describe dramatic scenes where water and sand burst from the ground, creating large mounds known as sandblows. These aren't small disturbances. They are significant enough to reshape the landscape. A vivid example of the impact of liquefaction came from the 2011 earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand. The earthquake wasn't particularly strong, but the liquefaction it caused was extensive, affecting an area of about 30 to 50 square kilometers around the city center. This resulted in severe damage and made it the most costly natural disaster in the country's history, with repair costs estimated between $20 and $30 billion. Moving on, we'll look at the scars left by these quakes and what they tell us today. Earthquake shadows in the Mississippi Valley. Liquefaction can also make underground utilities behave unpredictably. For instance, pipes and cables that were once securely buried can suddenly shift upward, breaking apart. This disrupts services and adds to the overall chaos and damage in the affected area. The foundations of roads, bridges, and dams are not immune to this upheaval either. What was once stable can suddenly fail, leading to further destruction such as landslides and substantial sinking of the terrain. The Mississippi embayment is a prime example of a region that visibly bears the scars of past liquefaction events. Across this landscape, you can find evidence of numerous sandy eruptions. Some of these are unusually large, stretching 40 to 60 meters wide, suggesting the immense forces released during the earthquakes that caused them. Photos taken decades after these events show large crater-like sand eruptions, evidence of the powerful underground pressures that forced the earth to burst open and expel a mixture of water, sand, stones, and other materials. This phenomenon is not unique to the United States. Historical and recent seismic activities around the world, from India to Yellowstone, have shown similar patterns. Each event adds to our understanding of how earthquakes can cause the ground to dramatically change, reshaping the landscape in often unpredictable ways. Interestingly, the story of an ancient Roman city near Madrid, abandoned since the 4th century due to a devastating earthquake, adds a historical dimension to our understanding of liquefaction. The ruins left behind speak volumes about the sudden and violent changes that forced its inhabitants to flee and rebuild elsewhere. The dramatic effects of the earth ejecting its contents during an earthquake serve as a stark reminder of the power of natural forces. These events not only demonstrate the geological processes at work beneath our feet, but also highlight the vulnerability of the structures and systems we often take for granted. The large craters formed by earthquakes are like scenes from a dramatic play, where the earth itself seems to conspire to engulf everything built by humans. These craters likely happened when the ground beneath the city turned into a liquid-like state. Some of these holes were so large they could easily swallow entire rooms, and were found beneath neighborhoods where people lived. This paints a vivid picture of the fear those ancient city dwellers must have experienced. Inside these ancient craters, archaeologists found a plethora of Roman tools, knives, axes, and other everyday items. It looks like after these disasters, the Romans might have thrown these items into the craters, possibly as gifts to calm the gods they believed had caused the earthquakes. This act of throwing tools into craters shows how people often try to control or make sense of natural disasters by linking them to the supernatural. Similarly, the New Madrid earthquakes of 1811 to 1812 illustrate how nature's disruptions can reach far and wide. These quakes were felt over 1,000 miles away, even in places as distant as New York City. This wide-reaching impact is due to the characteristics of the North American plate. In the east around New Madrid, the Earth's crust is much thicker and denser than in the west. This difference comes from the crust's age and what it's made of. The eastern crust is older, and this oldness makes it behave differently. This solid nature of the eastern crust helps explain why the effects of the earthquakes traveled so far. However, simplifying the explanation to just geological features might make us overlook the unpredictable nature of earthquakes. It also avoids a more unsettling thought. Despite all our progress and knowledge, we are still at the mercy of the Earth's deep, uncontrollable processes that don't care about human activities. Events like these, whether in ancient times with the Romans or today with modern science, remind us of our constant interaction with the wild forces of nature. In both cases, whether by throwing tools into craters or studying seismic data, we are reminded of our role in the larger environmental story. This story is not just about human strength and cleverness, but also about how small we are in the face of the vast, indifferent forces of the planet. The eastern United States has a thicker, older type of ground called crust that can carry the vibrations from earthquakes much farther than the thinner, newer crust in the western United States. This is similar to how sound travels better through a dense metal than a piece of light would. For example, during the New Madrid earthquakes, this denser crust allowed the earthquake's effects to be felt over a very large area. Let's take a closer look at how earthquakes of the same strength can feel different depending on where they occur. A Did You Feel It map by the United States Geological Survey for a 5.7 magnitude earthquake in Greenville, California, in 2013 shows this well. The map uses colors to show where people felt the earthquake and how strong it was. Yellow and orange on the map mean the shaking was strong and caused some damage, mainly around the earthquake's center. The blue and green areas show where the shaking was weak. It was felt but didn't really break anything. The weaker shaking from the earthquake extended approximately 124 to 186 miles from the epicenter before it became imperceptible. Now compare this to a similar strength earthquake that happened in Virginia in 2011. The effects of this earthquake were much more severe. Near where the earthquake started, it shook buildings hard enough to cause damage. This intense shaking reached much farther than in California, affecting cities like Washington and Baltimore, and even causing landslides up to 250 kilometers away from the epicenter. That's 200 kilometers further than the earthquake in California, which shows the eastern region is at risk of damage over a much larger area, almost 20 times larger than in the west. Another example is an earthquake near the new Madrid Seismic Zone in Oklahoma in 2016. Although this earthquake released the same amount of energy as the others, it was felt much further away because of the eastern region's geological features. The crust in the east is old and dense, which helps it to transmit the energy from earthquakes across long distances. Additionally, the area around the Mississippi Valley has a lot of soft, water-soaked soil that makes the shaking worse. This not only spreads the shaking further, but also points to a big problem with how prepared the area is for earthquakes. Places like California are well prepared for earthquakes. They have strict building codes and plans in place to handle them. However, the eastern states are not as well prepared. The buildings and infrastructure there are not designed to withstand strong earthquakes. This makes it more likely for them to be severely damaged if an earthquake happens. What do you think about eastern states' preparedness for earthquakes? Are we underestimating the risk? Like, comment, and subscribe.